The idea that we should all give up our democracies, our independence, and hand it over to a group of unelected bureaucrats in Brussels who fail with absolutely everything they touch is not a project I support.
Today we're big news, no? Britain won the Nobel Peace Prize.
No, the European Union today has won the Nobel Peace
Britain
Prize.
Britain is part of the European Union, though.
Sadly, yes, we are. It's the most extraordinary award, because anyone that's been watching the news will see the last time the EU featured was last week, when Mrs. Merkel went to Athens to be greeted by a violent demonstration and people dressed up in Nazi uniforms. We couldn't have even imagined this level of unhappiness even 3 or 4 years ago. And so to me, there's an irony here, that we all grew up in a Europe that was divided from west to east by the Berlin Wall, and now we're living in a Europe that is divided from north to south by the Eurozone, and far from us all loving each other and getting on wonderfully and having a new European identity, the Greeks are talking about the Fourth Reich, and Bild, the German newspaper, slags off the Greeks as being useless, lazy, and a waste of time. And we're living in a Europe, actually, where we're beginning to dislike each other. So I find the prize totally astonishing.
Speaking about German media, one of the bigger German magazines, put on a bigger article on the online, the most dangerous man in Europe. You were one of them. So do I have to be afraid of you because, as a German?
You have to be very afraid of me if you're employed by the institutions of the European Union, because I would want you sacked. All of you. Gone. Out. Go. As a German, should you be frightened of me? Well, I don't think so. I'm married to a German, after all, and I want to live in a Europe where sovereign nation states, democratic nation states, trade and cooperate together. I love Europe. I love you. You'd have to be a moron not to love Europe. The wonderful thing about Europe is we've got this amazing diversity within a very small geographical space. What I find totally abhorrent is the idea that we take all those different states and without ever seeking the consent of the people, we try and force them into one under a new flag, a new anthem, and with unelected bureaucrats in charge. It's the stuff of nightmares.
So describe the European Union from your point of view to us. What is it in your eyes, the European Union as a whole?
It's a political project. It is aimed at creating a United States of Europe. And it was done post-1945 because, frankly, the French had had enough of the Germans invading them every 25 years. And so the idea was, if you abolish nation states and we all come together under one union, one flag, one army, one police force, one anthem, that would mean peace in Europe. So the intentions behind it, just as the intentions behind communism too, were honourable. Idealistic and honourable. But they made a fundamental mistake. And the mistake was that it wasn't the existence of nation state that was the problem, it was the absence of democracy. And wars are not caused between mature democracies. Wars are caused where there isn't a democracy and you get a state that is imperialistic, expansionist. That's what causes war. The focus after 45 should have been on democracy in nation states, not their abolition. And I would warn with this. We tried this once before, because after the First World War, we looked at the Balkans, all little different states with their own flags and identities and constant bickering and difficulties that went on in the Balkans, and we said we can't go on like this. We can't have all these Balkan states going around shooting archdukes and causing all this difficulty. I know what we're going to do. We're going to put them all together in one country. We're going to give them one flag, one anthem, one army, one president. We'll call it Yugoslavia. They'll all love it, and it'll be peace forever. Well, it was held together by communism, but as you know, within the last 20 years, we've seen the worst outrages and civil wars in Europe that we've seen since 1945 as those nations fight to get back their identities. And we are making the same tragic mistake with the European Union.
You have the establishment, you have most of the members of parliament who are like pro-Europe.
Yes.
They don't want a referendum, they don't want to get out of the EU. And if you talk to people in the street, or even Tories in front of the conference, which we did, most of them will say, yeah, we want to get out.
Yeah, the truth of it is that the one thing that does unify people together is the political class across Europe, all of whom love the European Union, and even in Switzerland and Norway, which for them mercifully have not been part of this union, even there, their professional career politicians would love to join. So it is without doubt, the EU is unquestionably the best thing that has ever happened to career politicians and professional bureaucrats. But look, this gap, and you've mentioned this gap, this gulf between what ordinary people want and what the political class want, this gap is gradually being filled in. There may not be a voice of opposition in German politics yet, but there will be. But just look at Finland. 5 years ago, there was no real voice of opposition in Finland, and yet, in the general election last year, the True Finns came within 1.5% of winning the general election. Change is coming.
So it's the same, basically, the story of your party. A couple of years ago, nobody really took it seriously. The famous Cameron quote, they're all fruitcakes and nutters and all that. And then we had a very strong past election. What do you think is going to happen next year, next European election?
Oh, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be down at the bookmakers putting money on and not talking to you. You can never tell. All I would say is this. If Cameron, Clegg and Miliband, our political class, if they insist on keeping us trapped inside a European Union, which increasingly is seen by the people of this country not to work for us in terms of economics, but even more importantly, to be robbing us of our democracy, and if they continue with that course and refuse a referendum, I think, with a bit of luck and a following wind, UKIP could win those European elections.
As a party that was completely, a tiny party a couple of years ago.
Well, that's right. But you see, if politicians get out of touch with the way their electorates feel, something has to give. And I think the rise of UKIP and the rise of the True Finns, and indeed in the Netherlands, on the right and the left, you've got parties that are growing up and being very critical about European Union. This is a natural response to politicians not listening.
An interesting thing is that Germans haven't really understood how serious that's why we're here actually making this film, how serious the Brits are about getting out of the European Union. It's hard for you to answer, but why do you think that is? That even the communication between the states isn't really working.
Well, it's funny. I think one of the big problems is, in fact, the media. We have in Britain a balanced media. We have newspapers and media outlets that are very, very pro-EU and wanted us to join the euro, but equally we have our sceptical wing here. And it's very evenly balanced in this country between those that like it and those that don't. So we are lucky that we have a good, proper debate. When I go to France and Germany, I don't see any critical media at all. Everybody seems to support the consensual line, that because we've been on this course for 50 years, it's the right way to continue. And that, I think, is the biggest problem. But, and this again change is coming, the internet is changing things. Because a younger generation of people don't get their news and don't form their opinions through conventional means. And I've noticed, with Germany in particular, huge numbers. Whenever I've mentioned Germany in a speech, and the fact that since 1945, Germany's been a very successful democracy and a very happy democracy, and that it's beginning to lose that. I noticed that from Germany, I get a huge response on email from people and responding on Facebook and Twitter, and it's all coming from the under-30s.
And do you know some German? Do you speak German?
No, not really.
Because there are a lot of comments when a lot of clips from Aubrey of your speeches where you thrash the European Union or Merkel and call somebody a dictator on YouTube, and there are comments on German underneath, and they're very pro.
I've never called Merkel a dictator. I've never been rude. I've never been rude about Angela Merkel. And in fact, what I've said is that this German-dominated Europe that we're living in now has happened by accident and not by design. Basically, the Germans have wanted ever since 1945 to be popular and to be liked, and ordinary German people are feeling very uncomfortable that actually if they go to Greece on holiday, they may not get a very good reception.
But what I was asking was, they're actually very, they like you in Germany. If you read the comments just on YouTube, they're like, oh, that's a guy who finally says the truth, isn't that odd? Because you're criticizing Germany in a way.
No, I'm not criticizing Germany. I'm criticizing German leadership. And there's a massive, distinct difference here. As I've said to you already in this interview, I love Europe. I think the fact we've got this wonderful, rich diversity of peoples in Europe, provided we make sure that the nation states of Europe are democratic, we will live at peace, we will trade together, we will cooperate together, we'll have reciprocal deals on student exchanges, I'll come and work in Hamburg and you'll come and work here, we'll agree sensible common minimum standards, we'll do all the things that a mature democracy should want to do with its next door neighbours. But the idea that we should all give up our democracies, our independence, and hand it over to a group of unelected bureaucrats in Brussels who fail with absolutely everything they touch is not a project I support.
So give us a vision. What do you think? How will the UK and the EU, work together in a couple of years down the road? What's going to happen?
Well, I think that it's pretty clear that the Eurozone crisis is so grave that Messrs. Barroso and Van Rompuy are going to use it to push forward a new, deeply illiberal treaty. It's also clear to me that most countries in Europe will go along with it, but that Britain won't. There is no prospect of us joining this next phase of European integration, and I suspect the Czechs and the Poles will probably say no too. We have a real battle here in this country. There is going to be a referendum in this country. I suspect what David Cameron will try to do is to fob us off by saying, do you want to join the new federal union or just stay as we are? But that won't be good enough for us. We want to have a referendum on whether we stay in or whether we get out. And if we get that right referendum in the next few years and the British people use their voice and say we don't want to be part of the European Union, not only will we free ourselves from this, but actually very, very shortly thereafter, there'll be countries like Denmark and Finland and Austria saying, hey, we'd like this same status too.
I actually asked Tories if they're afraid of you. And some said no, and others said, he has become very successful. He's a problem for us. How should the Tories deal with
I'm not a problem for the Tories. David Cameron is. After all, he was the Tory leader who said, I give you this cast iron guarantee that if I become the British Prime Minister, you will have a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. It didn't happen. So I would say to the Tories that want to blame me, you're looking the wrong way.
Politicians do lie, sometimes.
I'd noticed. But then again, I have an advantage here in that unlike most people in career politics, I actually had a job in the real world. I know it's astonishing because virtually nobody in politics today has, but I spent 20 years in the private sector, the last 9 years of which I ran my own company. I know what it's like to employ people. I know what it's like to have to go out and borrow money. I know what it's like to take risk and to live in the real world. And I think when we're talking about pragmatic economic solutions to where we are, I've got a slight advantage.
Yeah, and you took meetings in New York at the Wall Street with financiers, and of course you know the city. What does business want? Do they really want to get out of the European Union? Aren't they afraid that the disadvantages would,
Well, business, look, the reason that we joined the common market and stayed in the common market was because the voice of business said it was the right thing to do. Indeed, my family voted yes, because we were a family that worked in business, and the concept of having a bigger market free of tariffs made sense. But you get to a point where you have to ask yourself a question. Do we need to be part of the European Union in order for Mercedes and Audi to sell their cars in Britain? No. No, we don't. We can have a simple free trade agreement. And isn't the cost of being part of this single market, and I'm talking about employment legislation, I'm talking about health and safety, I'm talking about the environmental burden. There comes a point where the cost of that outweighs even the free trade deal that we've got. And thirdly, I'd say this. We're living in a global economy. And it is an outrage that a country like the United Kingdom is now banned, forbidden from making its own trade deals with other parts of the world. So Britain's future, yes, we must be engaged with Europe. We must have a good, sensible, working trade relationship with Europe, which is in your interests, and I think in our interests too. But really, the UKIP message is this. Europe is much too small for our future. We've got to start thinking globally.
Two more little questions. One thing I don't understand, and I keep on hearing this, I get the feeling that a lot of people in Great Britain think now that the European Union is weak, our position is stronger now that we can renegotiate our deal with the European Union. Is that really true?
No. It couldn't be. It could not be further from the truth. And the recent thing that I've seen in the European Parliament from all sides now is a real hatred and hostility of Britain. Hostility because they know we're not going to join them on their crazy project, moving on to this ridiculous level of a federal union, and hatred and distrust and dislike because of what they see in Brussels as our Anglo-Saxon model of capitalism. They hate us. People like Mr. Martin Schulz would love to see the City of London closed down, and actually our bargaining power is now the weakest it's ever been. And there was a very interesting report, a leaked report recently, saying that last year in the European Council, behind closed doors, Britain lost nearly every single vote that it contested. So I would argue that our status, our standing, our influence within the EU is now probably worse than it's ever been. And as they move on to a fuller federal union, leaving us in a sort of antechamber, we will become the Cinderella state, asked to do all the skivvying, but not invited to the top table or the ball.
Yeah, because Brussels is all about negotiating deals, I do this for you, and then you help me with another deal, and if you are the pariah, then you have a problem, right?
Yeah, you do, and I think we have a huge problem. We have a huge problem there, and I just feel, actually, do you know what? We'd get on better with the EU if we weren't a member of it.